The U.S. housing market and real estate home values are beginning to see adverse effects as inflation pushes the Fed to raise interest rates. Americans are fearful of losing their jobs and mass corporate layoffs to help companies stop the bleeding and hemorrhaging cash from declines in revenues. Increased costs of goods sold, higher insurance premiums, workers' comp rates, and other taxes and regulatory fees, plus the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine, continue to cause problems around the world and hitting our economy, investments, and wallets every single day. And now, Russia, China, and several other nations are teaming up to destroy the US dollar. Russia, China, and Brics nations plan to craft a new international reserve currency. I mean, what more could be tossed into this dumpster fire to further fuel the flame? Well, funny you should ask that. The Great Salt Lake is a vital part of Utah in revenue, habitat land, and water in a desert, and it is quickly drying up and could possibly disappear altogether. And as lake levels continue to drop, there are added consequences and risks from dangerous dust clouds and dust storms. The Great Salt Lake is drying up, and the state of Utah is facing an environmental nuclear bomb. And poisonous dust clouds threaten Salt Lake City as the Great Salt Lake continues to lose more and more water. With some reports blaming climate change and rapid population growth for shrinking the lake and creating a bowl of toxic dust that could poison the air around Salt Lake City. According to worldeconomicforum.com, climate change is causing lakes to dry up, leading to a number of unfortunate circumstances. The latest includes the Great Salt Lake's water levels continued decline and the possible risk of it causing toxic dust clouds to form around Salt Lake City. The Great Salt Lake has decreased by 2/3 of its size since the 1980s, and as it shrinks, it has seen increasing salinity levels, in turn posing a great risk of killing off more marine life, which 10 million migratory birds depend on for food. Even more frightening, the shrinking lake means more arsenic from the lake bed will be exposed. And that is a frightening thing to think about. Salt Lake City is home to about 75% of Utah's entire population, and high winds and storms can carry the arsenic into the air that surrounds nearby Salt Lake City. Republican state lawmaker Joel Ferry said, "We have this potential environmental nuclear bomb that's going to go off if we don't take some pretty dramatic action." Lawmakers in Utah are concerned that the declining water levels will lead to an ongoing scenario similar to California. There, Owens Lake was entirely drained for municipal water use in Los Angeles, which has now paid $2.5 billion to prevent toxic air pollution from taking over the city. Now, that's a lot of money. Where do you think they're going to get that money from? I'll give you two guesses. A good guess would be saying goodbye to all that stimulus money Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said Americans are sitting on, and the main reason why they refuse to go back to work. Some other potential solutions include diverting less snowpack away from the municipality and agricultural uses as the snowpack runoff feeds into the lake. Salt Lake City could also instate fines, water use restrictions, and other water conservation measures, but count on them enforcing the latter. Utah lawmakers have also recently started looking into the possibility of building a pipeline from the Pacific Ocean to bring water into the Great Salt Lake. All talk and time wasting, if you ask me. Jim Steenberg, a really smart science professor at the University of Utah, said, "We have to have a solution where more water goes to the Great Salt Lake, either through natural stream flow or, now we're hearing about this pipeline proposal. But that pipeline proposal is probably going to be extremely expensive and not very practical." The Utah professor said, "It's often said that water flows uphill to money. So I don't exactly know where this will go." Now, I can imagine where this will go, and I didn't even finish getting my online doctorate degree from Strayer University. But while experts are still trying to figure out a solution, it's clear that the consequences of ongoing water crises in the western U.S. are posing significant threats to people and wildlife in these regions. And I may be a little off base here, but I'm detecting a little bit of salt from a recent statement from Colorado Senator Michael Bennet. He said, "When hurricanes and other natural disasters strike the East Coast or the Gulf states, Washington springs into action to protect those communities. But we haven't seen anything like that kind of response to the Western water crisis, even though its consequences are far more wide-reaching and sustained than any one natural disaster." Maybe he's right. So Biden, what's up with that? Maybe Mitch McConnell is hating on him too, and he don't want Jerome Powell and the Fed to come off them ends. I don't know. Tell me what you think in the comments below. But for now, Salt Lake City residents and visitors are at a risk of dangerous, poisonous, arsenic-laced dust clouds as Great Salt Lake keeps shrinking. Now, this is not a new development, but growing increasingly more of a concern as lakes and rivers are drying up across America and causing many people to begin to panic and add to their already long list of worries to prepare for. Utah Governor Spencer Cox is encouraging a path forward together to develop plans and strategies to save and preserve the lake's value, a home and oasis for over 10 million shorebirds and billions of dollars generated in revenue from invaluable water in the desert. Great Salt Lake is an economic driver and an apex ecological system while also becoming an ecological disaster. Utah reports their government is underfunded, and current suggestions for projects that could possibly help save Great Salt Lake from exposing more of the 2/3 of its lake bed that is already visible may be too far out of fiscal reach. And desperate for solutions, which, as crazy and expensive as it sounds, bringing in ocean water to save the lake, which is now at a depth shallow enough for the average person to walk through and barely get their ankles wet, doesn't sound like that bad of an idea. I will continue to monitor the Great Salt Lake and dangerous, poisonous arsenic dust clouds and bring you more information as it becomes available. Now let's talk money. Because despite what Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell thinks, most Americans are not flush with cash from stimulus checks. And in fact, many are dangerously close to, at, or even below the poverty line like Alice. And you may be asking yourself, but Kevin, who's Alice? Well, unfortunately, you. Someone in your family, a friend, coworker, colleague, or loved one may be Alice. Alice is an acronym for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. As cashiers, waiters, child care providers, and other members of our essential workforce, Alice earns just above the federal poverty level, but less than what it costs to make ends meet. These struggling households are forced to make impossible choices each and every day. While such hardship is pervasive, there are trends of historical census household data that some societal groups are disproportionately Alice. Brace yourself for social credit scores, ladies and gentlemen, but over 40% of U.S. households are unable to afford basics, forcing them to make impossible choices and risky trade-offs every day. What the high-income earners rarely ever worry about, the middle class and working class poor must be diligent when approaching and managing the 6 essential elements of a household budget: housing, childcare and education, food, transportation, healthcare, and technology, as well as taxes, which all affect financial decision-making for Alice families. And for the growing number of families who are unable to afford the basics of housing, childcare, food, transportation, healthcare, and technology, these workers often struggle to keep their own households from financial ruin while keeping our local communities running. But for now, Alice also represents the data reshaping the dialogue on financial hardship and a grassroots movement that is picking up steam across half of the U.S. states and counting. But if you want to take action now and learn how you too can start a small business, become your own boss, create a side hustle, begin generating passive income streams, and increase your earnings potential, click the link in the description and let's chat. Now, even though the most recent inflation data in Europe and largely inaccurately modest CPI reports for the U.S. have risen significantly higher last month, Russia and members of the Brics countries revealed leaders in the 5 major emerging economies are in the midst of creating an international reserve currency. And analysts believe the BRICS reserve currency is meant to rival the US dollar. I believe fellow YouTuber, the Economic Ninja, has covered this along with several other channels by now. But a recent conversation that I had with a good friend of mine who's heavily involved in the financial markets and world economic sector prompted me to share this information with you to help aid in your preparation for what's coming down the pipeline. This is not financial advice, and I'm not a financial advisor, so take it for what it's worth. But this is just my 2 cents. Russia and China spreading rumors of plans to no longer use the US dollar as the reserve currency, causing the dollar to sink until it becomes worthless, is not quite as simple as that. And to equate the US dollar's value to be the equivalent of 63 cents is just absurd. A response sparked just days after Russian troops invaded Ukraine. The G7 and a host of allies in Europe and Asia declared a freeze on the assets of the Central Bank of Russia. The move, unprecedented in its swiftness and scale, instantly incapacitated roughly half of its $630 billion in international reserves. Up to this point, central bank reserves had only been frozen multilaterally after abrupt regime changes like those in the case of the Bolshevik and Chinese revolutions or Hugo Chavez's Venezuela. Immediately, warnings were uttered about unintended consequences, in particular, the stability of the US dollar in the international monetary system. As many have convincingly argued, the Russian reserves freeze alone is unlikely to end the dominant role of the US dollar, but it might, over time, induce major shifts in global monetary relations alongside a broader rewiring of globalization, making the last 30 years look like a lost golden age, which may not necessarily be a bad thing if it were to happen. But we are a long ways away from not being able to use U.S. funds for purchases of food, water, rent, mortgages, loan payments. You get the gist of it. I'm going to continue building my portfolio while monitoring the financial market shifts so that I will continue to be aligned and in a position to earn handsome returns on my investments and continue building wealth for the foreseeable future. If you want to learn more about my investments, techniques, strategies, hacks, hit me up. My info is in the description below.